I'm Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief of USA Today, and this is Capitol Download. We're joined today by Senator Tammy Baldwin, Democrat of Wisconsin. Senator Baldwin, thanks so much for being with us.
I'm delighted.
You're a member of the Budget Committee. Nothing averted those automatic spending cuts that took effect this month. Do you think it is possible that we are going to see, though, a grand bargain on the budget now?
You know, it's going to take a little while, but there's a lot of pressures that I think could lead us in that direction. This week we are dealing with the continuing resolution that will end on March 27th and looking to make sure that there's some stability through the end of the fiscal year. But at the same time, both houses are beginning to tackle their budgets. And I do think that as this plays out in the months ahead, we have a real opportunity to at least stop living from fiscal crisis to fiscal crisis, cliff to cliff, if you will, which is something that has been very frustrating to the American people and to folks who rely on clear signals from the federal government for planning.
The Senate hasn't passed a budget since 2009. The House likes to point that out. Will the Senate succeed in passing a budget this year?
I believe we will. My first few months in the Senate and the work that we've been doing in committee preparing for the markup leads me to think that we have a really good chance. We've been listening to one another, and I think we'll be able to pass a budget document probably by the end of next week.
There are some big differences between Democrats and Republicans when it comes to trying to reach a grand bargain. Republicans are against tax increases. A lot of Democrats are against changes in entitlement programs. But the president has indicated some willingness to make changes in entitlement programs in the effort to get to a grand bargain. And I wonder if you would support a plan that went to a less generous calculation of cost of living benefits for seniors who are on Social Security.
You know, first of all, we're focused a lot on what has contributed to our deficit and our debt, and Social Security has not contributed one penny to our debt and deficit. That can't be said about some of the other programs that we describe as entitlement programs, so I think we start there. Why would we start with a program that we do need to pay attention to in the out years? But as we're trying to tackle deficit and debt, let's start with the main contributors. I believe that we need to take an approach very unlike the approach that we're going to see out of Paul Ryan in the House. He would turn Medicare into a voucher program. There's no need for that. I truly believe that we can see significant savings in the Medicare program without jeopardizing benefits. When we look at the rate of medical inflation, not just in Medicare and Medicaid, but across the spectrum in the private health insurance market, there are incredible savings to be had as we push delivery system reform through. And that's, I think, where we should have our focus.
But thinking about Medicare and how to save money in Medicare, would you be opposed to any plan that included raising the eligibility age for Medicare? Would that be a non-starter for you?
Yes, it would. Frankly, one of the commitments we made in healthcare reform outside of Medicare was to try to achieve a long-held goal that every American should have access to high-quality, affordable health care. Raising the eligibility age does nothing to that value and that commitment.
Let's go back just to close the loop on that first question on a less generous cost of living increase for seniors who are on Social Security. Is that something you think could be talked about down the road? You said you don't start with Social Security, but could that be part of a package? Or like raising the eligibility age, is it something that you wouldn't consider?
You know, the way I would like to see us approach the solvency of Social Security, again, a debate that I think should be outside of this immediate budget context, would be the way Reagan tackled it in the 1980s, to put together a bipartisan commission. In the 80s, it was chaired by Alan Greenspan. The reason why this sort of process works well with Social Security is there are only a limited number of variables. It's not like Medicare with all of its complexities. Social Security, you have the payroll tax level, you have the benefit level, you have the age of retirement, all of those things to work with, but there are a limited number of variables. So what happened in the 80s is this group got together, they had everything on the table. They agreed upon a package, and they gave Congress an up or down vote on that package. It passed. I thought because it was bipartisan in nature, they did a good job of a balanced approach. Now, you may have some skepticism as I describe this, because doesn't that sound a little bit like what was required in the Budget Control Act and what was viewed as the task of the Simpson-Bowles Commission? But I would again go back to there were far more variables that they were dealing with. That's not the type of process you can use with something so complex. But I think it works well with a very tight task that the Commission has to tackle.
Do you think it is important to get to a balanced budget?
Absolutely. But I think what is our initial task is to recognize that the country faces two epic challenges right now. And I don't weight one above the other. In fact, if I do, it tilts more towards getting our economic engines back at full throttle, get people back to work who haven't yet found work or haven't found work that paid what their former work used to pay. That's one of the challenges. And the other is tackling our deficit and debt. I think we need to stabilize our deficit and debt. And I think that a lot of the groups that have looked at this very carefully have a good suggestion on where we need to get. It's that $4 trillion over a decade. And I want to remind folks, we're well over halfway there in terms of the bipartisan decisions that have been made over the last year and a half. We're at about $2.5 trillion that has been identified, and we have some ways still to go. But what I don't want to see is us focusing only on the deficit and debt situation to the extent that we might go through another recession or that we might see more jobs lost. And that was the effect of the so-called sequester. All the economists that I've looked at said this will have an impact on our GDP. This will have an impact of about 750,000 jobs in the U.S. That's not helpful right now. And as long as policymakers keep a focus on the fact that we need to grow our middle class again, we need to focus on the economy, then I think we can have a balanced approach to tackling our deficit and debt.
I wonder, do you hear any concern from Democrats that President Obama might cut a deal with Republicans in Congress for a grand bargain that includes spending cuts, includes tax increases that Republicans don't want, but also spending cuts and especially entitlement changes that Democrats might be uncomfortable with?
Because you have two houses of the legislature, the Congress, I think that we are going to look for leadership, but then we have to get to the details. Remember that a budget is a broad outline that reflects choices and reflects values. And it doesn't get into the nitty-gritty. The Appropriations Committee, and to a certain degree the Finance Committee in the Senate, take the budget product and move on with it. I think that with the two budgets that we'll have once the House and Senate acts, that we will have the framework for the compromises that need to be made in order to move our country forward and get away from this crisis-to-crisis management.
You also serve on the Homeland Security Committee.
I do.
It's hard to imagine two senators with more different views on many issues than you and Rand Paul. We saw that filibuster last week he did on the issue of drones and whether U.S. could use drones against U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. And I wonder if on that issue you agreed with Senator Paul.
I still think there's more that I want to learn about the legal guidance that the president got, although I have been able to read a fair amount about it in recent public reporting. So, but civil liberties and constitutional civil liberties are very dear to me. In my past in the House of Representatives, my prior service there, I was one of the few to vote against the Patriot Act because I thought that it impinged upon Americans' civil liberties in ways that I felt violated the Constitution. As we have dealt with the issue of FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, I have often had objections moving forward. So this is something that I take very seriously, that I continue to look at with regard to specifically the issue of targeting U.S. citizens.
So what did you think about that filibuster? It's been a long time since we've seen a senator stand up there and do a visible talking filibuster to stop something or to draw attention to something he thought was wrong.
Yeah, I have to say that it's in the context of a larger debate about use of the filibuster and abuse of the filibuster. But I have to say that there was a lot of respect for somebody who didn't just phone in a hold or an objection, or even come to the floor and place that hold or objection and then walk out. I think the fact that somebody would stay and state their opinions on an issue was respected regardless of the larger context of the filibuster debate. And frankly, some of the reforms that were being proposed would have demanded that there be a talking filibuster.
You are the first woman elected to the Senate from Wisconsin and part of a class of 20 women senators, the most ever in the history of the United States. Does it make a difference? Do women behave differently in office than men do?
Well, women have different life experiences than men, and we bring those to the job. So I'm not necessarily going to say anything about do we behave differently, but nobody checks their life experience at the door like a coat check and then walks into the office to do their work. You bring it with you wherever you go. It informs your decision making, your approach to problem solving, and I think that's a perspective that we should value. We should value having diverse perspectives in every legislative body. The more that our Senate begins to look like America, the better I think we'll be governed. But I would also say that at 20 in the Senate, we're sort of reaching more of a critical mass where we're, as women, also meeting together across the party aisle to get to know each other better, to find the common ground, and to think of projects that we can work on together to make the Senate and the Congress a more functional institution.
You're also the first openly gay senator, and I wonder, was your sexual orientation an issue, do you think, for voters in Wisconsin last year?
It seldom came up as I traveled the state. As I said earlier, the sentiment in Wisconsin is people wanted to be listened to, they wanted to be heard, and they were asking the question, who's going to go fight for us? And decided to trust me with that responsibility to go out there and try to make a difference on their behalf. I did come up in the press. I was often asked about it by the media during the course of the campaign. What I say is, as the first openly gay member of the United States Senate, if you're not in the room, the conversation is about you. If you're in the room, the conversation is with you. And that's very transformative. Like I said before, nobody checks their life experience at the door when you go into work. You bring it with you, and it helps inform the conversations you have with others, and it will for me.
You've been running in elective office for 2 decades. Was it different when you first started to run? Was it more of an issue? Has that changed public attitudes?
Certainly public attitudes have changed. The debate has changed significantly. I'd say that one of the biggest changes is just in pure numbers. When I was first elected to local office in 1986, the Dane County Board of Supervisors, there were probably about 24 openly gay or lesbian elected officials in the world that we knew of at the time. Now there's, bordering on 1,000. The visibility has changed, but also the American public's attitude, if you look at a series of issues, has really evolved, as using the president's words, and that's been very significant.
Senator Tammy Baldwin, thank you for joining us on Capitol Download.
Thank you so much.